In 1483, two boys walked into the Tower of London. They were the sons of a king. They never walked out. No one ever found their bodies. No one was ever properly convicted of their murder. And 16 years later, an entire chain of kings in England, in France, in Scotland, in Burgundy, had to decide what to do about the fact that one of those boys might still be alive. His name, as far as anyone can prove, was Perkin Warbeck, a boatman's son or a customs official's son from Tournai in Flanders. For 7 years, half of Europe called him Richard, Duke of York. He was received by 2 kings as royalty. He married into a royal family. He came within 1 battle of taking the throne of England, and to this day, historians still argue over whether he ever, even once, told the truth about who he was. This is not a legend passed down by peasants. This is diplomatic correspondence between the courts of Europe, signed, sealed, and archived. In Tacitus, this is history's great frauds. Today, the tailor's son who nearly became King of England, and the grieving aunt who built him, piece by piece, out of grief, spite, and one dead prince's memory. To understand Perkin Warbeck, you first have to understand a murder nobody witnessed and nobody confessed to. In 1483, King Edward IV of England died, leaving 2 sons, Edward, aged 12, and Richard, aged 9. Their uncle, Richard of Gloucester, was named Lord Protector. Within months, he had declared his nephews illegitimate, locked them in the Tower of London for their own protection, and crowned himself Richard III. They were seen playing in the Tower gardens through that summer. Then, gradually, less and less. By the autumn of 1483, they were not seen again. No trial, no announcement, no funeral, just silence. And a new king, who benefited enormously from that silence. Richard III ruled 2 years before he was killed at Bosworth Field in 1485. The crown reportedly plucked from a hawthorn bush and placed on the head of the victor, Henry Tudor, now Henry VII. A new dynasty, a shaky claim, and a dead king's rumored sons, still unaccounted for. Henry married Elizabeth of York, uniting the 2 warring houses. But one branch of that family refused to accept the new order, and she lived not in England, but across the sea in Burgundy. Her name was Margaret of York, sister of the dead King Edward IV and of the dead King Richard III. She had married into the House of Burgundy decades earlier, and never once accepted that her family's throne now belonged to a Tudor. She had no army. She had no legal claim. What she had was patience, money, and an extraordinary talent for finding the right face. His actual origins are, appropriately, hard to pin down. By his own later confession, his name was Peter Osbeck, called Pitterkin or Perkin, a common nickname for a delicate child. His father worked in customs or as a boatman, depending on the source. He was raised partly in Tournai, partly in Antwerp with relatives. He was frail as a boy, the kind of child people fuss over, not the kind people expect anything from. As a teenager, he moved constantly between Tournai and Antwerp, serving in various households along the way. He spent long stretches among English merchants living in Flanders, and he mastered their language completely. Accent, idiom, manner. This detail matters enormously. Everything that came next depended on one teenage boy speaking flawless English in a city where almost no one did. Margaret of York had agents searching for years, quietly, patiently, for a young man of the right age, the right bearing, the right face, who could plausibly pass as her murdered nephew, Richard, Duke of York. Sometime around 1490, in Antwerp, One of them found him. Whatever this boy actually knew about his own life, from this point on, none of it would matter. One chronicler of the time wrote something close to this: that the boy was said to have been born in Tournai, son of a converted Jew, and that King Edward himself had stood as godfather, not to the boy, but to his father. A small, deniable thread of royal connection, just enough for a rumor to hang on. What followed was, essentially, an education in being someone else. Margaret taught him the bearing of princes, how to carry dignity without arrogance, how to wear the quiet humility of a survivor of tragedy. She described in detail the manners, appearance, and habits of the real Richard, Duke of York, his parents, his siblings, and the members of the royal household he would have known as a child. They also rehearsed the hardest part, the parts of the story that couldn't be checked. How the boy survived the tower, how he escaped, where he had wandered since. Margaret gave him a plausible, vague account and told him never to deviate from it. By every account, he had a remarkable memory and an even more remarkable gift for improvisation. The historian who later wrote his official condemnation still couldn't help admiring how convincing he was. Around 1490, he was sent under a false name to Portugal in the company of an Englishwoman, Lady Brampton, to wait quietly until his patroness gave the signal. The timing had to be perfect. If he appeared too soon or too obviously from Flanders, the plot would be traced straight back to Margaret's door. He spent nearly a year there, waiting, rehearsing, becoming. I want to pause here because this is the part people skip. This wasn't a con man improvising on the fly. This was a year-long state-sponsored production, funded by a duchess, coached like a role, staged like a play with an audience of kings. The question of whether Perkin Warbeck really believed he was a prince misses the point entirely. He didn't need to believe it. He needed everyone else to. In 1491, he sailed to Ireland, a land already restless under Tudor rule and hungry for any excuse to resist it. The moment he stepped ashore in his fine clothes, the townspeople began inventing his identity for him before he said a word. First, the Earl of Warwick, then a bastard son of Richard III, and finally, the story that stuck: Richard, Duke of York, alive. By his own later account, he tried, mildly, to deny it. Nobody was interested in the denial. He began writing to the great Irish earls, Desmond and Kildare, calling for support and recruits. Word of an English prince alive in Ireland travelled fast. Fast enough that it reached the King of Scotland and gave him one more reason to keep his peace talks with Henry VII cold rather than warm. An impostor with no army had already begun rearranging the diplomacy of 3 kingdoms. Then Margaret's timing paid off a second time. King Charles VIII of France was looking for exactly this kind of trouble to make for England. An invitation arrived from Paris. In Paris, he was received with full royal honors. Charles VIII called him Duke of York in public, housed him in splendid apartments, and assigned him an honor guard. Around 100 English nobles and exiles came to pay court to him, including Stephen Frion, once King Henry's own secretary, now defected to serve the pretender full-time. For a few months, Perkin Warbeck lived exactly like a prince, but it was never about him. Charles VIII was using him as leverage to bring Henry VII to the negotiating table for the Treaty of Étaples. The moment peace with England was signed, in late 1492, the pretender became a diplomatic liability rather than a weapon. Charles, for the sake of his own honor, refused to simply hand him over, but he made it clear the welcome was over. Notice the pattern, because it will repeat with every king in this story. Every monarch who hosted him did it for their own reasons. none of which had anything to do with whether he was actually a prince. He was a tool for making trouble for England. The moment the trouble stopped being useful, he stopped being welcome. He fled Paris before anyone could hand him over, and went back to the one person who had built him and had no reason to stop believing in her own creation. He arrived in Flanders pretending, carefully, that this was his first visit. A shipwrecked exile arriving by chance at a safe harbour. Margaret played her part to perfection. She questioned him at length as though testing a stranger, then feigned astonishment, then joyful disbelief, and finally embraced him as her nephew, risen from the dead. It was a performance rehearsed months earlier, staged now for an audience of an entire continent. In 1493, at the invitation of Emperor Maximilian himself, he attended the funeral of Maximilian's father, Frederick III. And there, among genuine royalty, he was formally addressed as King Richard IV. Think about that for a second. The moment a real Holy Roman Emperor treated him as a legitimate king happened at somebody else's funeral. Even his best days carried a little bit of borrowed grief. From then on, Margaret always addressed him by her dead nephew's name. She gave him the title, the White Rose of England, and a personal guard of 30 halberdiers dressed in crimson and blue livery. Her own court, Flemish and foreign alike, treated him with exactly the reverence due a king's son. Whatever this young man's private thoughts were, he now lived entirely inside someone else's story. News that the Duke of York was alive crossed the channel fast. The story people told themselves was almost comforting in its shape. Richard had been spared at the last moment. The executioners' hearts had failed them, and now, after years of hidden wandering, he had come home to claim what was his. Henry VII suddenly had a real problem. Not an army at his gates, but a story people wanted to believe. And here's the part that should unsettle you a little. Contemporary accounts agree the young man himself had become genuinely convincing. So convincing that some historians believe repetition had done something to him. That after enough years of living the lie, he had, in some sense, started to believe it too. We will never know. Inside England, the rumour found real believers among real power. The Lord Chamberlain of the royal household, Sir William Stanley, along with several other lords and knights, entered a secret conspiracy in favour of Duke Richard. Most kept their involvement quiet. One did not. Sir Robert Clifford, a well-regarded nobleman, sailed to Flanders, met the pretender in person, and wrote back to England that he had no doubt this truly was the king's son. Henry VII fought back the only way that actually worked. Not with soldiers, but with spies. He sent agents into Flanders, posing as defectors and sympathizers, who worked their way into the pretender's own household, while others quietly traced the young man's actual origins back through Antwerp and Tournai. Every servant, every neighbor, every scrap of his childhood was eventually bought or questioned. At the same time, Henry tried to solve the problem at its root, proving the real princes were actually dead. He had two men questioned in the Tower, Sir James Tyrrell, said to have arranged the murders, and one of the men said to have carried them out. Under questioning, they described the smothering of the two boys in their sleep and their secret burial beneath a staircase. Henry never published this confession. The details, even for him, were too useful left unconfirmed. In December 1494, Henry made Robert Clifford an offer he couldn't refuse. Full pardon in exchange for every name he knew. Clifford took it and named the Lord Chamberlain himself. Stanley, one of the most powerful men in England, the man whose troops had helped win Henry the Crown at Bosworth, was arrested, tried, and executed for treason. It was the single most effective blow struck against the pretender's cause, and it never touched him directly. It simply removed everyone who might have made him king. In July 1495, he finally attempted an actual invasion. anchoring off the Kent coast between Sandwich and Deal. His army was not an army. It was a few hundred debtors, drifters, and hired soldiers of fortune. And the local gentry of Kent had already decided, quietly and without drama, exactly which side they were on. Kent's gentleman lured part of his landing force ashore with false signals of welcome, then cut them down and rounded up roughly 150 prisoners. Watching from the ships, he realized the trap for what it was and refused to land the rest of his men. Henry VII had the captured prisoners hanged all along the coast of Kent, Sussex, and Norfolk, used, quite deliberately, as human warning markers for anyone tempted to try the same thing. He sailed back to Ireland, having lost most of his men and gained nothing. But he was not finished. He had one card left to play: the King of Scotland. In November 1495, he arrived in Scotland with a full retinue and was received, by all accounts, with real warmth by King James IV, young, bold, and no friend to Henry VII. Whatever his private suspicions, James told him plainly that whoever he truly was, he would never regret having taken him in. To remove any lingering doubt about his sincerity, James gave him something no king gives lightly: a bride from his own family. Lady Catherine Gordon, daughter of the Earl of Huntly and the king's own close relative, a young woman of celebrated beauty and virtue. Whatever else this marriage was, it made the pretender, however briefly, genuinely royal by marriage. A strange, real consequence of an entirely invented claim. In September, James led an invasion into Northumberland, supposedly to install him on the throne of England. No English support materialized. It became instead a straightforward border raid, burning and looting rather than liberating. According to the chroniclers, the pretender himself rode to the king in genuine anger, saying he wanted no crown bought with the blood and ruin of his own countrymen. Whatever he actually was, in this one moment, the sentiment reads as real. Peace talks between Scotland and England soon stalled over one demand. Henry wanted the pretender handed over. James refused outright. Having sheltered him, armed him, and married him to his own kinswoman, to surrender him now would mean admitting everything he'd said and done was a lie. But privately, after enough quiet conversations with the English, even James began to suspect the truth. He finally, gently, told his guest it was time to find somewhere else to be a prince. His last chance came from an unrelated uprising. Cornwall had already rebelled that year over crushing taxation, and its survivors, pardoned but unrepentant, sent word that if he came to them, they would follow. He landed with barely 80 men. By the time he reached Bodmin, nearly 3,000 had joined him. He proclaimed himself Richard IV, King of England. His advisors urged him to seize a fortified city, to arm and encourage his followers with real plunder. They besieged Exeter, the wealthiest city in the region, but the citizens refused to break. After days outside the walls, he abandoned the siege and marched toward Taunton, already looking for an exit. By midnight, he had slipped away with 30 horsemen, abandoning the Cornish rebels who had sworn to die for him, and rode for the nearest sanctuary he could reach. He reached sanctuary at Beaulieu Abbey and surrendered on the promise his life would be spared. At Taunton, on October 5th, 1497, he signed a confession before Henry. His real name was Piers Osbeck, son of a boatman from Tournai. Henry, consumed with curiosity about the man who had cost him so much sleep, still never once looked at him face to face, only from a window at a careful distance. He was made to sit in the stocks, first at Westminster, then at Cheapside, reading his own confession aloud to crowds who, not so long before, had wanted very badly to believe he was their king. In the Tower, he tried once more, bribing 4 of the guards and drawing in his fellow prisoner, the young Earl of Warwick, a genuine Plantagenet with a real, if weak, claim to the throne. The plan was simple and desperate. Kill the constable, take his keys, and free them both. The plot was betrayed before it began. He had, in the end, only ever been useful as bait, this time to catch a real prince instead of a false one. On November 16, 1499, he was tried and convicted at Westminster, judged, pointedly, as a foreigner rather than a traitor, since a foreigner could be executed for acts committed after landing on English soil. He was hanged at Tyburn days later, reading his confession aloud one final time and affirming its truth with his last words. The Earl of Warwick, whose only real crime was existing close enough to be used, was beheaded on Tower Hill soon after. Nobody ever proved with total certainty who Perkin Warbeck was. Not Henry VII, who had every resource in England to do it. Not the historians who came after, with 6 centuries to try. Maybe that uncertainty is the whole point of this story. A duchess needed a prince badly enough that she built one out of a boatman's son and a good memory. 2 kings needed leverage badly enough that they didn't particularly care whether the story was true. And a 9-year-old boy's disappearance was never actually solved. It was simply outlived by everyone who might have wanted the answer.